We had a subscriber wanted to ask a question about your current training, like how that looks right now. How often are you training? What's the split like now? Is it still upper lower like we were talking about? Maybe you want to talk a little bit about that if you're open to it.
Yeah. For some years now, I've tended to do push, pull, and legs, probably not in that order. So I think the most beneficial way of doing it is an upper, lower, upper. So it would be push, legs, pull, or pull, legs, push, creating a space between those upper body workouts with a leg workout, and typically 3 on 1 off. Still doing 3 on 1 off. And sometimes I'll do 6 in a row. Sometimes I'll do push, legs, push, legs, pull, and then have a day off. It might be 6 times a week. So today was a pull session. So I did pull-ups. I did a version of pull downs. I did straight arm pull downs. I did some TRX rows, body weight again. So I'm not loading the back. In the past, I would have done bent over rows. So my go-to now is using the straps, TRX rows. Then I did some rear delts on the pec machine. Then I did an isometric hold, like a planche movement where the arms are straight to throw isometric tension on the biceps. I did a few of those holds, and then some lightish dumbbells, doing curls and hammer curls just to finish off. So that was today's workout. It's about 24, 25 sets, something like that.
Again, what you would describe as hard sets, close to positive failure type of thing.
Positive failure every set, yeah.
Repetitions in the 5 to 10 for the upper, or maybe even as high as 15, and then 10 to 20 for the lower.
Yeah, definitely. On the leg press a couple of days ago, I was hitting 20s. I didn't go any lower than 20 reps.
When you repeat the pull, is it different exercises?
Could be. If I was at home, I always start with the pull-ups. Pull-ups is my first exercise. Just find it tremendously beneficial for back. I enjoy doing it as well. I do strap rows at home, possibly pull over, dumbbell pull over a bench. Might do those. And then it'll be a version again of what I've described, maybe rear delts over an incline bench. So flies over a bench. I use dumbbells at home, obviously, whereas I might use a machine at the gym. Seated dumbbell curls are my staple biceps movement, and hammer curls and some isometric stuff. Always dumbbells because I've got more flexibility in movement. It's not as rigid as a bar. I don't like using the Smith machine. I have used them, but I always end up hurting my shoulder with a Smith machine. I think it's the fixed plane of movement, whereas dumbbells suit me. I might do 4 sets of incline dumbbell, always do dips, body weight dips. Love that movement. Possibly sometimes if it is at the gym, I might use an incline kind of machine, the isolateral ones. Again, there's a bit more play and flexibility in that than there is a bar. Then for delts, seated shoulder press with dumbbells, standing lateral raises, dumbbells, and then triceps movements, maybe push downs with a cable, some push-ups off an incline for triceps, taking like a close grip, diamond grip there, and just using body weight at an angle, pushing reps out. Sometimes I'll do one arm dumbbell extensions or double arm dumbbell extensions or EZ bar extensions, just for variety. But that's pretty much it for a push workout. And I tend to do 3 lots of hanging leg raises at the end of that workout.
And that's typically, like you mentioned, like 4 sets or so to positive failure, but you're adjusting the weights. So typically you'll strip weight off each set.
Yeah. So the last time I did push, I think I used a pair of 30 kilos for a couple of sets, 3 sets maybe, and then I dropped to 26s. I've worked up to the 26s, maybe managed 3 sets of 5 with a 30s. Strength's not what it was. And then go down to 26s. Back in my 30s, I would maybe use the 40s or even the 42s.
kg dumbbells.
Yeah. I've been as high as 46s, which is not tremendously strong either, but I think I get a decent set of 8, 30 degree.
That's respectable, depending on the quality of the set, of course.
Yeah, they were decent quality sets. They controlled.
I can imagine. And then the leg day?
Yeah, this time, the leg day, I go up to 4 plates now. I'm only managing 4 plates for 20 reps. So I'm a plate down on what I was doing maybe 6, 7 years ago, but I've had a back injury, so I've got to be careful. I can't see my getting up to 100 kilos a side again, actually, the way it feels at the moment with 80. I think I'd be more inclined to get to 25 reps than I would ramp the weight up.
That's a plate loaded leg press, like the 45 degree.
That's right.
So you're implementing more like leg extensions, leg curls, these types of things as well?
After I'd done the leg press, yeah. I mean, back in the day when I was 31, I remember on the leg press using 8 plates a side. That's 160 kilos a side. So 320 plus the device itself, and managing 22 one time, 22 reps. I don't keep a logbook and write things down. That would kind of detract from the experience and the enjoyment. I just do how I feel. So I go in and I'll do a bit of this morning. I mean, obviously I know I'm doing a pull workout, but I know I'm going to start with pull-ups. But after that, I'll see what's free and think, oh yeah, I fancy I'll do a bit of that. And then fit 3 of those sets in there. And as long as I keep moving, I don't like hanging around. I'll go for something that's free so that I can just keep the pace going and keep the rest periods short. I'm not going to wait for a piece of kit because I've got something fixed in my head. If someone's on it and I'm not interested, I'll go and find something else.
How long did your workouts last with this high pace?
45 minutes this morning.
Okay.
About 40 minutes for my leg workout the other day.
So you'll hammer out 20 sets in about 40 minutes for the most part.
Yeah, sometimes quicker than that. If I'm doing 20 sets for a push workout, I'd do that in half an hour.
So when you were doing these 40 set upper body workouts back in your prime, that would take you about an hour or so.
50 minutes.
50 minutes, so less than an hour.
Yeah.
But you were supersetting on, so you were like bicep, tricep, these type of supersets.
Yeah. It was quick.
It was quick.
I was fit. I was very fit because I was moving around all the time.
During your prime for the upper lower, which is typically how you did things, like it was full upper, full lower. That was kind of the routine that you followed during your peak.
2003, 2004, that was my routine. Yeah.
Okay. And then what did it switch to after that?
Probably push pull in 2014, 15, 17 when I competed. Push pull legs. Always trained legs on their own because I've got nothing left in me. I can only focus on legs. It's hard enough doing carbs at the end of a leg workout.
Right. You kind of transitioned between upper, lower, and push pull legs. Like those were the two things that you did throughout your career.
Yeah.
Because you enjoyed it too, as well, right? That was the thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
You felt it improved the look of your physique as well, just hitting body parts more frequently.
It did. And I think then it became a bit of an obsession as well, because when you realize something works, you can become almost paranoid about not going to the gym because of the impact that it might have. So I even think I live with that now. So I know that if I go there, it's going to keep me in shape, and I don't, want to stay in shape. So I'm just driven to go.
Would you say there's a bit of anxiety around training even to this day at your age?
Yeah, there may be. But I think with me, some of it's like ADHD. I have to move. I have to do something that's going to keep me physically satisfied. I can't do without exercise almost. And it's both a commitment and a dedication, as well as something of an obsession, I guess.
It's interesting because you did the bro split at one point, the quote unquote bro split, where you hit one body part per week, and you noticed this is not really working for me. You felt like after 3-4 days, that was the max where you thought your physique was looking better based on the body part you trained, and then you'd flatten out or look like almost you got a negative effect, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because the way I've ended up training and the way I trained for competitions, I felt like I was a man on his own. My sense, my perception is that not many people train that way. It's slightly different.
I think there's a pattern, a tendency for people to train in certain ways. And obviously bodybuilding is a sport that relies on progressive overload. So I think the poundages were always a driver for people's progress. Whereas I think for me, I wasn't so much pushing that. And when I was preparing for contests, it was more about dialing in, which I think is fairly unusual. I think that style of training, the kind of pace, the short rest periods, the volume, the high frequency, the almost constant overreaching in the context of a deficit, it's unorthodox, I think is what I would say, because people would say, triggering cortisol levels and those stress hormones aren't good, and that's detrimental to progress and to your physique. But actually, the stress seemed to work. That was the thing that allowed me to get in shape. And if it meant losing sleep, or if it meant not feeling my best for several weeks, then I would just suck it up and accept that that was what it felt like when I was on a contest regime.
That's the key point there. Contest regime, not off season. Off season, like how was your sleep and recovery during your off season?
Well, I remember the last show I did in 2017 in Boston, and it probably took my body the best part of 6 months to calm down after that show. By that, I mean just being able to sleep properly, because I'd gotten into a pattern where I'd wake in the night and I'd have a few carbs and I would have a dish of oats, and that would allow me to sleep more comfortably. It kind of sent my system into haywire, really. And it took some considerable months for things to calm down and for me to go back on an even keel and just wake up at a normal time, have a normal 7 hours sleep, let's say, eat at regular times without needing to eat in the middle of the night. It's just bizarre.
Was there a lesson there? Would you do things differently?
The lesson maybe to calm things down would be to train less often, to allow my body to recover so that it wasn't operating in a stressed state for as extended a period as was the case then. And I think probably now, my sleep is sometimes hit and miss, and I do wonder whether it's because of the frequency. I think I sometimes wonder if I was carrying more body fat. I was a bit heavier, that I would sleep better, but I wouldn't look better, and I probably wouldn't be healthier necessarily. I might be sleeping better, but I just used to sleep quite well. And it was only when I kind of got into the contest pattern post 29 and on that sleeping became less consistent.
And that could have been just due to the overtraining symptoms and just dieting and being super lean, that kind of thing.
Could be. It's well documented that possibly low testosterone levels can impair the quality of sleep. So quite recently, in the last 2 years, I've done home tests for testosterone, and I'm on the high end of normal.
How's your sleep now?
Hit and miss. So sometimes I can sleep pretty well, 7, 8 hours. Sometimes it's 5, 6 hours. But other people don't sleep very much either. I mean, Ian Duckett always used to report that his sleep was like 4 or 5 hours a night. I kind of consoled myself with that and thought, well, yeah, I'm kind of like that too.
Speaking of Ian Duckett, I just spoke with him about sleep, and maybe you'll catch that video that just got released. That's the thing with this competing thing also. You guys are getting really lean, right? Like very lean. Yeah. You've achieved something that majority of people will never achieve.
I think so. And I think recovery is different for everyone. Recovery is contingent on nutrition and the quality of your diet and what you eat. I eat a very good diet. You know, it's balanced, it's healthy. I don't really drink alcohol. Occasionally I might have something, Christmas, birthday, possibly a holiday, but it's not my go-to. I can't recover, so I try and stay off it. And it's more important to me to train and recover than it is to indulge in that kind of stuff. But yeah, I just keep my diet together, and that allows me to recover. And I supplement heavily as well with antioxidants and chelated multiminerals and magnesium citrate and zinc. And I even started supplementing for testosterone purposes 3 milligrams of boron in the morning and stinging nettle morning and evening, because I'd read that has a positive impact on unlocking sexual hormone binding globulin. Now, my levels were quite high, and I understand that they increase with age, but I wanted more free testosterone available. And to do that, those combination of supplements can be helpful in freeing up more testosterone. And that has happened because I've been supplementing now for about 4 months, and my last set of markers were indicating that it had improved.
2 things here that sparked an interesting thought. The first thing is, you mentioned a very valuable thing I have to highlight, which was everybody's recovery is different, right? Like we might have someone listening right now who's heavy into competing, genetic factors, the way they're approaching it. They don't have any issues with sleeping, maybe only final weeks approaching a contest. Maybe that's when they just notice it, where they're having some issues, and then the rest they're fine. So everybody's different, like you mentioned with this. And also for you, would you say that improved as you were learning along the way, the sleep and the recovery and all that? Or you knew that you could have improved, but you were stubborn in a way because of the way you enjoyed doing things?
I guess it's partly the latter, and partly over time recognizing that I was just not going to worry about it. I think when it first happened, when I was 29, 30 years of age, it used to concern me. It used to make me anxious that I wasn't sleeping the way I used to, and the way people were telling me I ought to be sleeping, and that, all the theories that get run out there, and, cortisol's bad for you and all the rest of it. And it got to a point where I thought, well, this is just me. This is just how I am. And I'm not going to worry about it. I'm still able to train, and I feel a bit tired, but I get over it. And I've been doing this now for a long time, and the pattern is still there. Sometimes I sleep well, sometimes I don't. Sometimes it's linked to a leg workout. I mean, it was always the case when I was 19, 20 years of age. Whenever I trained legs, I always had 5 hours sleep that night. I just didn't sleep well after training legs. That happened from a very young age. So there's something there about stress on the body that disturbs sleep. You kind of roll that into a contest diet with high frequency, high volume, and all the rest of it, and it's not really a recipe for effective relaxation.
There's too many moving variables. There it is. Like, how's life stress? How's your nutrition during that time?
Yeah, it's always going to be difficult to attribute cause and effect. So you'll never be able to control everything in order to attribute it to that particular factor.
Exactly. But I will say this, high rep training, like in the 20s, and you can attest to this, my perception of effort, it feels harder than if I do a set of 5 to failure on a leg press. Or let's take a squat. Maybe that's more accurate for people to have an understanding of. Like a 20 rep set squat to failure versus a 5 rep squat to failure. One might be more taxing on your joint system, but one is going to feel harder on your cardiovascular system, and the perception of effort is going to feel a lot more difficult from my experience.
Yeah, I mean, the last time I squatted like that must have been about 43. And, I might only get with 130 kilos, like 5 reps, 4 reps. with 100, I've still got it, the video recording. I got 18. That was at a body weight of 60, I was about 67 kilos, I think.
That wasn't that far off your 5 rep or 4 rep max there, right? Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, that's right. I couldn't get any more than about 5 out of 130 at that age, at that body weight. So I think I maybe managed to double with 140. They were full reps.
You were technically better at doing the repetitions than you were at the, maybe that's a sign right there why you responded well to the higher rep work too.
I absolutely agree. It was something that I was able to tune into. I think it was both an intuition and also through experience, seeing the difference in the effect and how I responded in that way.
You know, it's interesting. Are you familiar with David Kay?
Yeah, I know David Kay.
Yeah. He mentioned something similar. He said he's much better at repetitions than he is at max effort work. Like a 1 rep max is like, huh? But then when he's doing the high rep stuff, it's, Doug Miller, another example. Are you familiar with Doug Miller?
I know the name.
Yeah. So again, high rep stuff, you'll do like 30 rep sets on like everything. So, these are interesting anecdotes, right? And from what you just said there, test your 4 rep, 5 rep max, whatever it may be. If you decrease the load by like, I don't know, just a small amount, and then all of a sudden you can get like a set of 20, that's a huge discrepancy, right?
It's an interesting thing that Arthur Jones, I know he was advocating something quite different because he was advocating a single set, but he said something like, we just reduce the poundage by a small amount and hit 50 reps on each leg for 100 reps in total for 1 set, and you'll notice a response. And it's just interesting. And, other guys from the past, I'm thinking now, Paul Dillett was reported that he used to do 40 rep sets on the leg press. So maybe there's something in it. Someone that wasn't hugely strong, given his gargantuan size, but he was more of a pumper, a repper. I think there's some value to it. Absolutely do, especially where legs are concerned, where, they're multi-joint movements and you've got to think about your knees, your hips, pelvis, lower back. You have to think about your skeleton. And mine has never been so robust that I can just like lump loads of weight on and think I'm going to get away with it. I'm just going to end up hurting myself. Some of that's genetics as well. It's down to some people are naturally stronger. And I think I found what I was good at, which is using moderate weights and moving quickly and doing the volume and using higher reps, especially with lower body work. That's my legs respond to higher reps.
Yeah, I think you've given people a lot to think about, though, especially when longevity is concerned and we're talking about sustainability for the long term, because there's going to come a point where the 4 rep stuff, the 5 rep stuff, is that going to be sustainable if we're talking about progressive overload in those rep ranges? Maybe not into your 50s and 60s, right? Now, there's going to be exceptions, of course, but for a lot of people, this is going to be something good for them to think about, or as they start to get older, maybe that's more accurate to say, because not everybody listening is approaching their 50s and 60s, but something to think about, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. With the upper body stuff, I think that's interesting because you found specifically that the high rep stuff didn't really mesh well, like the 20, 30 reps on like, say, for your chest or your back wasn't doing it.
Yeah, especially chest and shoulders kind of respond to rep ranges probably no lower than 5 and up to 10 to a dozen reps, depending on the weight. Certainly for some push movements with dumbbells, dumbbell press, incline press, I'm going to be hitting between 5s and 8s, I think.
Have you ever tried, like, if you were going to do this progression game, because that's kind of what we're talking about here, that's what's motivating for a lot of people as well, and if we're talking about growth or maintaining muscle at a certain point, we're trying to fight off the loss of strength, right? Or the expression of strength, how that's displayed on specific exercises. But have you tried, like, say, slowing down the reps? So instead of extending the repetitions, you might stick with like a 5 to 8 or 5 to 10, but just slowed it down, and then that's the progression. But I'm not sure how that would work in practice as far as, well, first of all, how motivating that is to maybe slow down a set to like 6-second negatives, right?
Yeah, and I think you might lose some of the concentric. Certainly, I could slow the eccentric down on the final couple of reps on a press. I think it's easier to do on curls. So typically, if I was doing dumbbell curls, I'd tend to hold the isometric. So there's a pause of a second or two and a low eccentric, and then curl up in a more natural way. But you're going to lose some reps doing that because it fatigues the muscle. Those things are particularly stressful. If there's an accentuated isometric hold with a dumbbell curl, you are going to fatigue the biceps quickly. If the end goal is about taxing the muscle, then it doesn't really matter how many reps you do. As long as the muscle's fried, you've kind of succeeded in working it.
I suppose that's a good way to look at it, as far as even if that's repeated, say, down the line, and you notice, I did this 20-pound dumbbell curl for 8, but I slowed it down down because I didn't want to necessarily go up in reps. Like there's a progression there. I think that's probably the more important thing if we're talking about this muscle growth thing, right?
Yeah, I think there are different ways of utilizing overload. There are different ways of employing resistance that don't rely on increasing poundages. And I think mixing it up keeps things moving and prevents the process from becoming stale.
I like that. Did you have any injuries aside from the back thing? Did you get injured a lot, or did you have aches and pains that you had to manage a lot with this approach of?
I've had injuries, yeah, tendons typically, so tendonitis around the elbows, what they call tennis elbow and golfer's elbow from rowing. I remember David Kay having, I think, a golfer's elbow injury. I remember speaking about that years ago, saying it took ages to recover from it. I've had that a few times. You can barely pick a bar up when that happens, when it gets so bad. Not so much now, but I used to get a lot of strains in the tendons from doing pull-ups and bent over rows, maybe because I don't use a barbell anymore and do bent over rows. I'm not getting those kinds of injuries. But wrists, I've got arthritis in one of my wrists. It was the arm that I broke playing rugby as a teenager, and there's a bit of debris in there. I had it MRI scanned. One of the bones is longer than the other in my arm, and the only way that they could deal with that is to re-break the arm and shave a bit out, and that wasn't going to happen. That's on my left hand. I occasionally get a flare up in that wrist. I have to be careful how I hold things and how square the wrist is.
I suppose that's because you brought up Arthur Jones earlier, and he had an interesting quote that sticks with me to this day, which was, maybe we should be trying to see how much exercise, not how much exercise we can tolerate, but how little we require. You know this quote? Do you think that the amount of total, now your goal was to build the best physique you can possibly build. Like you didn't want to leave any stone left unturned. You had this goal, right? But do you think that the sheer amount of volume had an impact on these, aches and pains that you were dealing with versus like say maybe like how Ian's approaching things? But then if you look at Ian and speak to Ian, he's also talked about how like he's been burnt out and he's had his fair share of joint problems.
Yeah.
So, like, we're talking about overload. I think regardless, you're going to run into problems at some point if you're redlining it or forcing overload, trying to force overload for the purpose of competing and whatnot, right?
Yeah, it's a hard call, isn't it? Because you could be digging the garden and you could hurt yourself. So it's a tricky one that I think in some ways doing things in a controlled environment and warming up properly and keeping the joints mobile is a good thing. I mean, that will enhance longevity, a linkage between lifting weights and bone strength, bone density. We know that sustaining muscle tissue sustains metabolism and metabolic rate. So there's a whole lot to be said about the value of exercise in terms of health and longevity. And the thing that relates to the question really is you'll never know. You can't go back to know what might have been had you not worked through 10 or 20 years of exercise and training in a certain way. So I can't effectively unpick the journey I've traveled in order to do it differently and potentially realize a different outcome.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things that you're catering to as well, like psychology. You mentioned the
ADHD. It's the hyperactivity, yeah.
Because you were talking about that, so I'm like thinking, okay, there's a lot that you have to cater to here. Like some things start to override other things depending on the goal, right?
I'm probably less attention deficit. I'm hyper focused actually, but certainly hyperactivity is the need to move, the need to exercise, and the impact on my mood if I don't exercise is quite significant. I think what you're trying to do is get the best out of your body without breaking it. I think that's what I've tried to do all the time. I'm constantly trying to exercise as hard as I can with the means I have available. And I don't want to push it too much for argument's sake on a leg press at this point and trigger a problem with my back. I'm always thinking, it's okay, you've done enough there. Think about the next workout. Whereas I think in my 30s and probably early 40s when I was still competing, I would just go absolutely to the wall. I would go as far as I could.
That's the lesson there from the years of doing this, right? There was an interesting quote from Marshall Johnson. Are you familiar with Marshall Johnson?
No.
Okay, Marshall Johnson, WNBF, IFPA, from the US though, so he's not in your neck of the woods. But for those listening, you might know who he is because we've had him on the podcast. But nonetheless, he said this great thing that stuck with me to this day, which was train to train another day. And because as bodybuilders, we want to redline it and failure everything and more sets and more training. And I think, I got to do this thing so it makes sense, not to completely destroy myself in one session, right?
Yeah, and it's a similar kind of rephrasing of something Lee Haney said years ago, which is stimulate, don't annihilate.
Yes, excellent. That's well put.
You kind of know what your limits are, and my limits are obviously lower now than they were before because I'm getting older and I'm going to be more prone to injury, and I've had injuries, so I don't don't really want to wake anything up at this point. I just want to keep it settled and just do as much as I can so that I can sustain.
Personality comes into it a lot, genetics and the mindset thing, right?
Yeah, and it's kind of how I am about most things. I'm quite obsessive. So, you know, I play the piano and I've got that behind me now and I spend hours on that. You know, I can just sit there and play it for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and practice,
Wow.
practice, 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 practice. And that's just how I am. And I think it's the same with exercise, really. Over time, if you look at it over decades, it's something that I've thoroughly committed to. And regardless of whether I compete or not, I get to the gym, I train in largely the same way. I'm eating largely the same diet. Yes, I've gone plant-based for some periods of time. I've recently reintroduced some fish into the diet. It has lots of vegetables in it, a little bit of fruit, but it's a very, very healthy diet. And just because I'm not preparing for a show doesn't mean that I don't follow a diet that's quite similar to the sort of things that I would eat whilst preparing for a show. I'm not switching it on because I'm competing. This is a lifestyle and this is part of the cultural air I breathe. And that's how I like to live my life.
When you were competing in 99 and then through the 2000s, early 2000s, what did that training look like? So how often did you train at your peak, would you say?
Every day. And I would only take a day off if I felt I needed one. There were times I trained for 10 days in a row. My goodness, it really pulled me in quickly. I'd feel a bit burnt out.